You know that feeling you get when you get a new game? You boot it up, start your new save file, go through a tutorial, or skip it. And depending on the game, the controls might feel similar to something else you've played before. And boom, it's like you've played the game for over an hour already. And even if it's a new kind of game for you, you don't struggle to find the buttons the game asks you to press. This is a fairly standard routine for people who play games a lot. Though, through my time observing people around me play games, I noticed something. Video games are really hard for beginners. It all starts with controlling the character or actions in a game. I've been observing my girlfriend, friends, and even parents try their hand on a variety of different games, and a few things stuck out almost immediately. The most common things my player encountered was unironically. From my understanding, this usually occurs when the player feels stressed out. Stuff from fast-moving sections to time-based challenges seem to make players feel this the most. I noticed it immensely during fighting sequences. To explain why this seems to happen, first let's establish what I like to call the safe zone. This is when the character you control on screen can stand around without any threat or challenges coming your way. Think of when you just start a big adventure game and such. Like the opening of Breath of the Wild. On that hill on the beginning, you find no enemies and you're free to just run around and assume that you cannot fail. So what seems to be happening is whenever an enemy, for example, actively comes up and interrupts the safe zone the player has, stress immediately kicks in. And depending on the game and how it chooses to teach its various mechanics and controls, it might all be too overwhelming. Confusion over how to control the game brings a fear of interacting with enemies since, at that point, you can fail. What new players always seem to ask when it comes to a new game is, how do I die? Or, in some cases, how do I win? And because of that general kind of thinking non-gamers have, i.e., you either win, whatever that means, or you fail/die, affects how interaction with the game is handled. The thought of failing in the game is so overwhelming, and in combination with not even understanding the controls of a given game, raises the stakes on a personal level. That is why the stress is so prominent. Players almost certainly knowing they will fail against their will, and in turn that leads to frustration, because failing at something you don't even understand properly is never fun. All of this leads to those moments of confusion, of anger, and those iconic phrases like, "I pressed the button! Why didn't he jump? Wow, this game is trash." The stress gets to the player, and in panic, the player then messes up the inputs, in turn leading to the character or game behaving differently than what was expected. And in some cases, that feeling of the game not doing what you want is enough of a turnoff to just walk away. Logically speaking, one would think that games should do a better job teaching the player how to play the game, but then the question becomes, Exhibit A. One thing common in a lot of modern games is the immersion-breaking pause. That is when the game pauses and just waits for the player to press the right button until moving on. In some cases, it's teaching both controls and trying its best to teach functions, which more often than not leads to overwhelming the player, in my observation. Tutorials like these usually takes ages to complete too, which seems to also bring down the general enjoyment the players seem to have. Now in contrast, some games, such as the formidable Souls-like games, don't force you to go through a tutorial in the same sense. In simple man's terms, the tutorial is optional. That is most often a plus, and the reason I say most often is because it sort of depends on what the game is striving for. If immersion is key, any kind of text box or obvious tutorial is going to be a hindrance. But then you have Exhibit B, games teaching the player how to play the game through carefully crafted sequences, not teaching controls itself but functions, what you can do in the game, so to say. This relies on logic more than anything. Take the wall jump from Super Metroid. The game never outright tells you how to do it in any way. It quite literally shows you aliens jumping on walls to get out of a pit. Using that information, the player will notice the only way out of the room is up. And as such, the player naturally tries to perform the wall jump themselves. Now, is it dickish forcing the player to learn it in order to proceed? Maybe, but it's a short sequence anyway, so I can't fault it. Generally speaking, the question of how to teach someone to play a game is a little weird, since there really is no right answer. It depends on what the game is trying to be, and more importantly, who the player is, since if it wasn't obvious already, people learn stuff in different ways. During my time observing, I've noticed one of two things. Either the player was waiting for the game to explain how to do anything at all, and yes, I mean anything at all, even something as basic as walking. The other thing is some players being naturally curious and thus starts to try every button to see what does what. Just do anything at all really that's not standing still. Eventually, both groups seem to try and proceed in the game they played at some point. So the general gist of it is that new players to any game really have to go through the same process, finding a way to learn that makes sense to them. Now for my last point in this video, I want to point out the utter mess that is. This is your standard Switch controller, right? You got all of these buttons with labels and so on. Then here's the Xbox controller, and finally the PlayStation one. In the context of there only being one platform the player was playing on, it wasn't super hard for them to find the right button the game asks to press. However, when other controllers and even keyboards gets thrown in, it becomes a lot more complicated. In a sense, the labels of the buttons themselves lose meaning when the players were exposed to different platforms. A thing of the past used to be the god-awful QuickTime event, most notably from Resident Evil 4. The QuickTime event proved not only to stress players out, but also to confuse them. This due to the fact that all new players had to look down on the controller to see what button was what. This comes naturally with being unfamiliar with a controller and a platform. Worse still was keyboards, as I said. Just one look at them and most players felt overwhelmed. My conclusion from this was that console games, or at least playing with a controller, serves as a much better starting point for the majority of people. Although it could be argued that if a person is used to working with keyboards and mice a lot on a day-to-day basis, it might be easier for them to adapt to PC gaming. Getting over the whole thing about looking down on the controller while playing is a process in and of itself, and isn't something that non-gamers will pick up upon in most cases. Interestingly enough, one common point of frustration in this regard came from the camera movement in 3D games. And while getting the camera right in a 3D game was always hard and to some extent still isn't perfected, that's not the issue I'm talking about. No, it was more about actually moving the camera while also, for example, walking around. Most players I observed had the tendency to straight up forget to move the camera while moving around in games, instead running face first into walls and other obstacles. This of course leads back to more stress and confusion due to the lack of clear vision, especially when enemies were close by and started attacking from out of sight. And again, to be fair, I'm not sure if this is caused by a lack of ability to multitask or if gamers like me just have the act of moving cameras around with ease so deeply engraved in our muscles at this point. Games are hard for new people, and that's not to say it's necessarily their fault all of the time. Gamers like most of you watching this are used to the gaming landscape and most likely have an underlying expectation when it comes to the control of the games you play. When you think about it, games ask a lot of people. Put in loads of hours, figure out what to do, and throw harder and harder challenges along the way most of the time. And all of that can only be accomplished by controlling the game. It's like riding a bike. All of us are most likely gonna be bad at it at first, and it may even seem overwhelming. But in the end, once you get used to it, you never have to think about how to change gears or anything like that. So before judging someone trying to get into games, or maybe even play for fun with you, remember, we were all bad at first. So be nice and try and help if you can. Thanks for watching. So yeah, it's been a while since I did one of these ending talks. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this video of mine, even if it might seem boring at places. Join me on this YouTube adventure if you want by subscribing today, and hopefully I'll be able to make more videos like this one. Thanks again. I'll see you all later. Bye bye.